Welcome everyone to Saturday. Once again, we have aliens coming down my neighborhood, so I have to be quick for today. Today, we have a surprise, because Blizzard has hit us with some surprising balance tuning, and it's Saturday. I thought the Blizzard devs are on pause on the weekend, but apparently not. Not for this round of tuning. So we do have some reasonable, some worthwhile mentioning nerfs going on for a few specs, and also quite some important buffs happening, right? Right as I had lined up our weekly updates of the Raid and Mythic Plus, we also have some things that will be relevant to the situation in Mythic Plus and the Raid, because certain specs which were in need of some buffs are going to get buffed, and then certain specs in need of some nerfs are also going to get nerfed. So let's start with the biggest, I would say likely the biggest buff of the day, which is the one to Unholy Death Knight. So we will see when we go over our update to our Raid weekly video that Frost DK, after the buffs of 10.0.7, has grown in performance and is doing quite fine. However, Unholy Death Knight is still towards the bottom. In fact, I think it's the least or the second worst performing of the DPS specs. So Blizzard is giving them quite the large range of buffs. They get 10% more damage to Raise Dead, they get 10% more damage to Army of the Dead, they also get 20% more damage to Scourge Strike or the advanced version, Clawing Shadows, as well as more damage to Death Coil, more damage to Soul Reaper, as well as slowing down the cast speed of Gargoyle Strike by half a second, but increasing the damage by 25%, which is actually a buff, because with high enough haste, you were actually clipping casts of Gargoyle Strike because of how fast they were supposed to be casting, so now it's actually going to be doing more damage as well. What is important about these buffs to Unholy is that these are not the type of buffs we have seen before. The type of buffs like, let's buff talents that the spec isn't taking. So if you continue with your normal build, those buffs are irrelevant because you are not using the talents which were buffed. In this case, these are all things that an Unholy Death Knight uses every day. Raise Dead, Army of the Dead, Scourge Strike, Death Coil. These are all part of the general rotation of Unholy Death Knight. So these are all significant buffs to Unholy Death Knight. They are likely in the front runner spot now to get Power Infusion once again in the raid because of the damage increase they will have. They will definitely be rising overall after this type of buff given to Unholy. Quite a good, well-timed buff, right as we are, 4 or so resets before the end of the season, and in 5 resets or so before the beginning of Season 2, if this buff stays for Unholy Death Knight. We then have a couple of buffs. These are not nearly as important, especially the one to Balanced Druid. This is the one that gives Star Surge 10% more damage and Denizen of the Dream 20% more damage. So while the buff itself is good, of course, Star Surge in particular for single target damage, there is the fact that Balanced Druid is also receiving a mini rework in 10.1. So there are way more things changing for Balanced Druid for the next season. While this buff is good at the moment, especially given that Balanced Druid is not doing particularly well in the raid, it is still one of the more broad specs in Mythic Plus when it comes to range DPS. There is Shadow Priest up there, and then below Shadow Priest you will find Balanced Druid, so they are still quite popular in Mythic Plus, but after this buff you will also have to see, as a Balanced Druid, what will the mini rework of 10.1 change. So I would still be happy if I were a Balanced Druid, but still I would have to see how exactly the spec will be changed once the more wide changes of the next patch will come live. What is perhaps more important is the one that changes Guardian Druid, because Guardian Druid, unlike Balanced Druid, does not have a mini rework in 10.1. As a matter of fact, right now in the patch notes of 10.1, there is no planned changes for Guardian Druid. So any positive changes coming right now are all good for Guardian. So, number one, the health and healing received from your mastery from Nature's Guardian is increased to 70% instead of 50%. So, Blizzard continues down the road of giving Guardian even more stacking max HP, which is at this moment basically the best way they have to defend themselves, going into the good old days of Guardian Druids having gigantic pools of HP. And then the other one, which is also quite powerful, is that the Barkskin cooldown now is back to having a 45-second cooldown, down to what it previously had, which was 1 minute cooldown. So much higher uptime now of Barkskin for Guardian Druid. Now, the buffs stop here for Guardian, so it's not that it's a massive amount of buffs, but it's better than nothing. Also, these are quite important, right? They give much more value to your mastery as a Guardian Druid. They also give you, as I mentioned, much more HP, which is something you value a lot as a Guardian Druid, as well as a higher uptime to Barkskin. So as far as changes go, these are quite positive for Guardian Druid. Now, we enter the realm of a rare revert of a nerf. Because, as you know already, I'm pretty sure, Preservation Evoker was nerfed. And it was nerfed by a lot. We will see in our weekly videos of Mythic Plus, but in particular in the raid, how far Preservation Evoker was falling compared to the other healers. At the moment, spoiler alert, at the moment Preservation was the second lowest HPS spec, only above Discipline. So the changes to Preservation are essentially an admission of guilt from Blizzard. Preservation's overall throughput is lower than we would like, since we have nerfed Lifebind and Temporal Anomaly. So the compensation for this bit too hefty of a nerf is that all of the healing of Preservation is increased by 3%, Living Flame healing is increased by 15%, and Resonating Sphere now applies Echo to 5 allies instead of 4. So previously Resonating Sphere applied it to 6, then it was nerfed down to 4, and now it's been found a middle way up to 5, right in the middle. So this is still, of course, going to keep Preservation a worse version than what they were before by quite a bit, but not nearly as disastrous. Also still back to being not nearly as frustrating in Mythic Plus. So now in Mythic Plus, your Resonating Sphere can go back to hitting the entire party, all of 5 players in Mythic Plus, rather than having to sit at 4. That was quite annoying when you were playing around with that. So the buffs are definitely welcome. We will also have to see Preservation is in a bit of a weird position, because they are, let's just say, primed to play a different build in 10.1, but at the moment that build is not nearly as strong, because that build will be enabled a bit more by the tier set bonuses, in particular the 4-piece set bonus of the next season, which at the moment they don't have. So they are in a bit of an awkward situation right now. As far as reverting what Blizzard did in patch 10.0.7, we also have a couple of reverts down the Hunter class. Hunters were buffed in 10.0.7, and now they are nerfed in this hotfix. BM is now doing 3% less damage, both the player and the pet, and then Survival is doing 10% less damage with Mongoose Bite. As we analyzed before, all of the Hunter specs were doing much better in the raid after 10.0.7. Perhaps Blizzard believes they were doing a tad bit too much, so they are slightly adjusting them. What Blizzard is also slightly adjusting is Protection Paladin. Now, if you are a Flavor of the Month reroller, don't get worried. This nerf has nothing to do with the current power of Prot Paladin. The nerf is that Hand of the Protector now increases Word of Glory healing by up to 100% when cast on allies, when previously it was up to 250%. Now, Prot Paladins don't actually run this talent. So if you were just pushing keys as a Prot Paladin, this is useless to you. This doesn't really nerf anything. The reason why this happened is because of what we have seen lately in the community, the more widespread showing of 1 tank 4 DPS groups clearing high keys without a healer. Most of the high keys were either Court of Stars or Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, but still, they were, 24, 25, 26, 27, even 28 key level done without a healer. A lot of that was done thanks to this talent, thanks to this talent for Prot Paladin, which made your Word of Glory essentially function like a lay on hands. So this nerf to this talent is basically specifically just for this. If you were playing Prot Paladin the normal way, this isn't really gonna change anything for you as a tank. We then have a large amount of buffs to Discipline, but in this case they are mostly just about their mana regen. Discipline is planned to have quite a good reworked tier set in 10.1, also mana friendly because they will get free casts of Power Word Radiance without costing mana, and now they also get more mana discounts. You have Power Word Shield getting its mana discounted, Renew getting its mana discounted, Power Word Radiance getting its mana discounted, and also Power Word Shield now absorbs 25% more damage for Discipline. So Blizzard seems to have identified the weaker overall of the specs for healers in PvE and trying to bump up Discipline before we get into 10.1. The last of the buffs for today goes to Holy Priest, and this one is exclusively for damage. Holy Fire is doing 15% more damage now, and Smite is doing 30% more damage. That's also okay, fine. Holy Priest was not doing that much damage as a healer. It is still far behind other specs in terms of damage. Resto Druid, Preservation Evoker, and now even Discipline Priest as well as Resto Shaman. So this is fine to buff Holy Priest's damage. But the last of the changes for today is gonna be a nerf, because this one is to Resto Shaman. So in our weekly update of the raid, just like we were pointing out that Preservation Evoker was falling down in performance after the nerfs, what we were pointing out is that Restoration Shaman was now the strongest of the healers. In terms of HPS, 3 months into the tier, okay, so maybe it's not that important, but at the very least that's what we have for us right now to show. So what resulted from that was Resto Shaman being very, very good. So Blizzard thinks it's a bit too good at the moment, so all of the healing done of Resto Shaman has been nerfed by 5.5%. This is perhaps still slightly too little, but it's a good start. It's also good that even on the weekend, still a month away from Season 2, we are still getting some hotfixes, some changes based on what patch 10.0.7 showed us. So I hope that this frequent level of tuning of the specs is going to continue down the line as we approach Season 2, and we try to push up as many specs as possible to make them as even as possible as we approach the next season. So for now, these were all of the changes for today. As mentioned, the biggest one of all was the buff to Unholy Death Knight. It's likely the one that will shake things up more overall based on the rest of the changes. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave you now to the rest of your Saturday. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel. You can still support, of course, in completely free ways, like liking and commenting down below on this video, as well as, of course, subscribing to the channel itself. There are also still other free ways to support, like following me over on Twitter or following me over on my stream on Twitch. But besides these social unpleasantries, we can now leave each other. Thank you guys, of course, for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, oh my god, that's too much. Why am I awake in the morning?